what I'd like to do over the next half hour or so is sort of anchor what you've learned in maybe looking at an intermediate future. Not too far out, but maybe 3-4 years out. Earlier this year, I found myself racing remote control cars. And that's not something I normally do. And I was in Vegas, and I was lined up next to a guy that I'd never seen before, and we were standing next to each other, and we watched the lights go red, yellow, green, and then we raced. And of course, I won. But that's not really why I told you that story. What was interesting about that story is I had no remote controller. Actually, I was controlling the remote control car with my brainwaves. This device that was attached to my head was made by a company called Emotive, and it's an EEG device. And I had, in a matter of seconds, trained the Emotive system and the Emotive artificial intelligence to recognize the brain waves that my brain signals to say go. And Emotive did this mostly as a demonstration because obviously there's better uses for this type of technology than just racing cars down the track. One of my favorite examples is these guys who Emotive partnered with Smirnoff and did something called Mind Tunes. I encourage you to look it up on YouTube. It's actually pretty phenomenal. And the nature of the project was there were several physically disabled gentlemen who had a love for music, and they had lost the ability to play. One of the gentlemen couldn't really speak anymore. The rest of them couldn't move their bodies. But through Emotive and EEG technology, they were able to convert brain waves to sound waves. And these guys were able to create music again. And so when we think about this technology and the possibilities that it will open up, it's fascinating to consider. Around that same time, I also got to try Oculus's next generation headset, which is set to release here in a few months. And if you're anything like me, virtual reality was something that was sort of off on the fringe. Yeah, someday it'll be interesting for gamers. But the experience absolutely blew me away. And this isn't a commercial for Oculus, but I can tell you that even though I knew it wasn't real, I found myself trying to interact with the space around me. It was 360 degrees of 3D, and it absolutely blew my mind away for so many different reasons. The future of media and the future of retail and the future of commerce will be significantly impacted by virtual reality. A couple of weeks ago, I talked to a gentleman named Gary Flake. But before I get to that, I want to show you this slide. This guy's name is Jeremy Ballinson, and I have this up here for a couple of different reasons. Number one, his quote that came out of an article from not too long ago is really indicative of the world that we're living in, isn't it? I've seen more technological change in the last 8 months than I have in the last 19 years combined. Does anybody else feel like that? Stuff is moving really, really, really fast. The other reason why I have this slide up here is the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab had a virtual reality headset that cost in excess of $40,000. And they just replaced it with an Oculus headset that just cost a couple of hundred. So not only are we seeing the pace of change accelerate exponentially, but we're actually seeing the price of things go from hundreds or thousands or multiple hundreds of thousands and make it applicable to the everyman, giving us all the capability to do things that were reserved for a tiny few just a short time ago. Anybody know what the cost to sequence the human genome was in 2000? Anybody have a guess on how much that cost? $100 million in the year 2000. Anybody know what it costs today? About 1,000. In the matter of 15 years, we've gone from $100 million to $1,000. And we're seeing this pattern across industries and across domains. Going back to the story of Gary Flake. Gary Flake is an internet technology pioneer. And he kind of blew my mind away because while I'm aware of this EEG technology, I'm aware of what's happening in virtual reality, he began to talk about what happens when these two technologies begin to combine. And if our brain is connected to the network, to the internet, and we have virtual reality that can actually visualize anything in a world that seems and feels real, and weird, it opens up tons of potential possibilities. I have access to thousands, potentially, of virtual agents. I have access to the entire world's domain of knowledge. I can do so many different things. And if you begin to consider the blending of these technologies, where I can imagine something and manifest it in something that feels real, that I can invite other people into that environment to collaborate with me, the possibilities for what we can do, what we will do, are seemingly endless. But really, this is sort of just highlighting the future of a path that we're already on. You see, we're already basically doing this, and we've been working on this, and this entire conference is continuing to work on this. We are shortening the distance between desire and manifestation. That's what e-commerce companies have been working on for quite a long time. I want something, I can search for it, I can purchase it now. The only problem is today with e-commerce, I still generally have to wait a few days for it, which is why retail and the physical is doing so well still. If I want something today, I can go to the store and I can get it. I can see it, I can have it, I can tangibly have it. That distance between desire and manifestation is actually really short. But in truth, we all know that experience is really poor. I still have to carve out time. I have to interrupt what I'm doing. I have to get in my car, walk to public transportation. I have to actually travel to the store. Once I get to the store, I've got to find what I'm looking for. Then I've got to grab it. I've got to put it in my basket. I've got to go check it out, and then I've got to drive home. There is a ton of friction involved in that transaction. Anybody know who this guy is? Peter Diamandis, right? He's a futurist, best-selling author. And he actually wrote something earlier this week that I don't normally read other people's stuff during my speeches, but I thought it was interesting. And while I don't necessarily agree with everything that he said here, I think it's worth us listening to and considering how it might change our role, how it might change our organization's role. And he's talking about the future of retail. You won't go to a store, ever. Eventually, clothing stores will go away, dematerialized and significantly demonetized, just like Amazon has done to most bookstores. Your body is scanned and the data file is private. It's your exact body on that exact day. You put on your VR goggles and appear in a virtual store. 0 time to get there, no traffic, no parking hassles, no walking across the mall to get to the store. You enter your personal clothing store. Everything in this store is your exact size. Everything fits. The store has every designer and every design on the planet. Forget retail, this is me-tail. Your friend who you called a few minutes ago joins you via their VR headset, and he or she sees everything you see. The experience is social and fun. You voice what you're looking for. Red, high-heeled shoes to match my new dress, which has a long black skirt. Suddenly, think like the movie Matrix, racks of perfectly fitting products appear like magic. When you see an outfit you like, you just point, and instantly an image of your virtual avatar that you see in the mirror is wearing it. No frustration of getting dressed or undressed. Your virtual reflection in the virtual mirror moves as you do. It feels and looks perfectly real. You wonder aloud how these virtual shoes would look with a particular blouse in your closet at home. No problem. Every piece of physical clothing you would own in the real world is also available for you to wear in this virtual world. You ask, and instantly you're wearing it. When you're done and you have the exact perfect clothes you need, you pay the bill and your clothes arrive the next day. And if the warehouse or robotic manufacturer is local, perhaps it's the same day. And oh, by the way, the cost for an outfit is at least half of what it is today. No middleman. Interesting to consider. And while this isn't necessarily going to be the future that we have, I believe elements of that story are true. And I think it's worth us considering how that will impact our organizations and our individual roles. Technology is changing, as you know, the behaviors of our customer, right? Really quickly. They've got more capabilities, more choices. They've got more power. Their journeys are more fragmented. They're participating more in digital channels. They have greater expectations and more paths to purchase. And while we're talking about shortening the distance between desire and manifestation, we can see things happening around us, right, that tell us that the story is true. I can now 3D print many products. And we're getting closer as that technology matures to imagining something or designing something for the first time and being able to 3D print it right at home. Medicine, you can actually do this now for the first time, the first approved 3D printed medicine. And so you think about personalized medicine, personalization in general, all this stuff is happening. Amazon Prime Now is spreading into more markets. And for those of you unaware, basically it's free 2-hour delivery. You can pay a fee for 1-hour delivery. Uber Rush just spread into new markets, 1-hour delivery free. All of this stuff is working. We are working collectively on shortening the distance between desire and manifestation. Anybody heard of magic? You can do what the sign says. I don't work for magic. I get no incentive here. In fact, I'm on the beta list. I'm not even approved yet. But what magic does is essentially you ask for anything, and they're orchestrating behind the scenes all these instant delivery options and all these product options. They're coordinating their own on-demand supply chain so that they can get you what you want as close to when you need it as possible and for as cheap as possible. There was the head of R&D for Hershey, Will Papa, was talking about the pressure that they're under. And in fact, consumer goods is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. And he was highlighting how consumers used to basically choose between, I want something that's good for me, or I want a treat. And those used to be two different experiences. Now they want a treat that's good for them, right? And he was also gave an analogy that says we used to pay for a mobile plan that was, if it was really, really good coverage, I was happy to pay a premium. However, if it was pretty good coverage, I'd get that for cheaper. Now what do we expect as consumers, right? We want the unbelievable coverage for a cheap price. Our consumers are unreasonable, and to a certain extent it's our fault, but the reality is we've got to respond to them in that reality. So technology is shifting what our consumers expect. It's also shifting the landscape around us. You see, because as we become connected, as our mobile phones go from 2 or 3 sensors to 12 or 13 or 14, as we begin to attach wearables to our wrists, as we wear wearable clothing, as we connect rooms and surfboards and devices all around us, we all just become nodes in a network. I was thinking as I was walking around here looking at the paintings, some of the portraits over here, and thinking about the artists that actually looked at somebody for hours on end, maybe even days, and took days to make those portraits. And we have one copy. And now we all have these phones that we can take and instantly share, theoretically, with the world in a matter of seconds. When we're connected to the network, it gives folks like Perez Hilton, and I hate to leave that example, but one guy, seemingly overnight, competed with a whole industry that had been around for decades and took mindshare and took attention and actually took revenue from them. There were a couple of guys that worked for Accenture, Larry Downs and Paul Nunes. And they'd been studying innovation and disruptive innovation for quite a while. And a couple of years ago, they noticed something different. Everybody knows and they're familiar with crossing the chasm, Rogers market segments of innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. That was kind of how business worked. Traditional corporate strategy said you choose one strategic thing to compete on, either product innovation, customer intimacy, or operational excellence. If you choose to do more than one, you will fail. But what he observed is that these new companies were participating in something called Big Bang disruption. And they were competing on all three at once, and they were winning. For an example, go back a couple of years and think of Garmin and TomTom. Anybody remember those organizations, right? They actually made a pretty awesome device that we were all happy to pay a few $100s for to help us get around. It was certainly a huge improvement over Thomas Guides. But seemingly overnight, Google provided something that was better, and it was cheap, and it was already on our phones. And those guys are still reeling. If we look at like what WhatsApp is doing, and some of the other OTT carriers, they're impacting and they're siphoning hundreds of billions of dollars from the telecommunications industry. And this is happening in a very short amount of time. This is the world that we live in today. The new business model across industries is essentially this. As we connect things, and you see the headlines, we're producing data and data and data, right? More data in the last 2 years than ever in the history of mankind. You've probably heard that stat over and over. As we connect the world, we're producing data. Data by itself is the starting point, but it's not really the answer. But by applying algorithms and analytics on top of it, it's revealing insights to us, seemingly to our consumers, and providing recommendations if they're really smart and really advanced. And the ones that are doing this best actually allow you to take action right then and there. This is true for customer service reps, this is true for marketers, this is true for customer-facing technology. This is the model. that we're all following, and then we repeat it over and over again. But at the end of the day, we can talk about technology, and there's been a lot of talk about technology today. There's been a lot of talk about how we improve our conversion rates and what metrics matter. But at the end of the day, at the other side of the equation is that consumer. And what do they want? Regardless of your industry and regardless of what you sell, your consumers essentially want two things. Help me accomplish what I'm trying to do, and/or help me to feel good. That's it. That's really what they're looking for from you. They're not necessarily looking for features and functions and all these things. They're looking for these two things. And in order to do that, you have to know them. Okay? This guy sums it up well. Don't bro me if you don't know me. And we can talk about all the things and all the inputs that allow us to help our customers and to serve them well. But really, you've heard a ton today about relevance, so I won't go into that. Transparency is a big movement, especially with the millennials and the Gen Y. I want to know what's in your product. I want to know where it came from. I want to know how it was made. I want to know how much money you make. I want to know how much profit you make. I want to know what you do with your profit. Do you support social causes? Are you about more than just money? Speed matters. Recent research suggests that consumers are willing to pay a premium if the product gets to them faster. Again, this trend towards shortening the distance between desire and manifestation. And finally, simplicity. This is a big one. The Corporate Executive Board recently did a research on what drives customer stickiness, another word for loyalty, what keeps them around. They evaluated 40 different factors: price, brand perception, a number of different factors. And far and away, the winner on what helped customers stick around was simplicity, decision simplicity. Because as we connect the world around us, things become a lot more complex. And we don't have time to get into that today, but we're all craving simplicity. We don't have time to do more research, to figure out the answers to all of these things. The easier you can make it on your consumers and your customers to transact, the better off you'll be. And at the core of all this is trust. We've had a couple of speakers talk about that today, but I don't want to underestimate the importance of trust. Has anybody read The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey, that book? It's a fantastic book that takes something we all nod our head to say, yeah, trust is important. And it articulates why it's important, and it converts it into hard metrics of business value. I'll share with you one quote today that if you remember anything from today, I think it's very, very important. When trust goes up, speed goes up, and cost goes down. When trust goes down, speed goes down, and cost goes up. And I can't think of any point in our relative history where that is more important than today, when things are moving faster and faster. And of course, experience. Don't you want some of that? I want some of what that kid has right there. Everything needs to be wrapped in an amazing experience. That's very, very important. And not just because it makes them feel good and makes us feel good and it's the thing that we're supposed to be doing, but it actually converts into hardcore business metrics. For the last 7 years, this group called Watermark Consulting has taken the performances of Forrester Research's Customer Experiences Index, and they've said, hey, how do those that excel at customer experience perform financially relative to those that are okay and relative to those that don't do all that well? And they've done this for the past 7 years, and as you can see, most of the charts look something like this. Customer experience leaders outperform the market at large, and they significantly outperform the laggards. Harvard Business School did a similar study, and the results were similar, as you might expect. Leading-edge companies outperform on core business outcomes that matter: profitability, quality, growth and revenue generation, market share, customer retention rate. During the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we innovated on products. And then we figured out, you know what, it's becoming increasingly, everything is becoming commoditized. And so we began to wrap service around those products and service innovation. And as we become connected, that hasn't been a great differentiator either. This is not linear or binary by any means, but we've seen a faster path to commoditization. And as we look ahead over the next 10 years, the way to differentiate is through experience. And the reason why is because it's very, very difficult to duplicate a competitor's experience for their customers. There are so many inputs: culture, brand, process, product. All of these things fit together and stitch together across an increasingly fragmented world. So over the next 10 years, if we're doing the right things, we'll be focusing our efforts on experience innovation. I've been saying this for a few years. In a world where nearly every industry, product, and service is experiencing shorter cycle times, the customer experience is arguably the last bastion of competitive differentiation. Artificial intelligence is making headway and taking ground, seems like daily. I want to take us out to the edge and kind of see what's going on so that we might be able to predict what's coming down the pike. A study recently at Georgia Tech they did a little experiment, and they had someone do their own life logging. Anybody know what narrative is? Have you heard of narrative, Chip, right? They didn't necessarily use narrative, but they did something similar, and for those unaware, it's this little necklace thing that you wear, and it takes a picture every 30 or 45 or 60 seconds of what you're looking at. It's basically you're logging your own life with a bunch of pictures. Georgia Tech did this. They took pictures every 30 to 60 seconds for a period of months. They had about 40,000 pictures. They took those pictures and they trained through machine learning. They trained the computers to what was in the pictures and where the person was. And after doing that, they ran different experiments, and the computers were 83% accurate in terms of knowing where that person was at the time just by looking at a picture. If you take that and extrapolate it out, if we can teach machines to understand our context and where we are and what we're doing, recommendations for what alternatives might exist or what might help that experience become better, when we might be able to leave a little bit earlier because traffic looks a little bit different, when we might adjust the lighting because our mood is in a different place. This is the thing that's happening out in the future. Artificial intelligence is also learning to recognize our emotions based on facial expressions. Affectiva is a company that is doing this, and they're teaching the machines to look at markers on your eyes, your nose, your face, in order to determine what emotions you're feeling. For those of you that are blind to your consumers today, maybe that doesn't mean much. But in the future, when you're interacting with them, or they're in a retail place and you're watching them explore and experience the things that you're offering them, whether that be content, whether that be products, whether that be a physical experience, this may matter. This will give you clues about how they're experiencing your experience and your journey and can help improve it. And even further, University of Northwestern did a study that actually used metadata from the cell phone and had an 87% accuracy hit on whether a person was depressed or not. A little bit scary, right? But as data comes together, we're able to infer what's happening and hopefully make better recommendations and serve our customers a little bit better. Did you guys see this? Anybody in here have a Tesla? A newer one? No? Okay, I wanted to drive it. I wanted to see it. Right now, yeah, exactly. You wouldn't have to drive it. Good point. Right now, they're sending out beta updates that essentially allows the Tesla to drive unassisted, allows it to change lanes, allows it to park. In my mind, this was happening like in 2022. This is now. It's not fully autonomous yet, but this is now. Right here, right now, while we're sitting in this room. This is happening. And reading reports and research about the automobile industry, I believe autonomous cars will be on the road in the next 4 years or so, which is pretty dramatic. And so if we try and think about what the world might look like 4 years from now, perhaps it makes sense to look back 4 years. And just for nostalgia's sake, 4 years ago, if you were savvy, you could have bought Bitcoins for $2 each. They went up all the way over to $1,100. They sit at about $256 a Bitcoin today. But maybe the most important thing to recognize about Bitcoin is actually the underlying technology, which is the blockchain, which major banks and financial institutions and stock markets have actually embraced the technology, and they're testing it right now. This may actually be the underpinnings of the future of our financial markets and any other exchange and transactions. In just 4 years, we went from not knowing about it to now that being our reality. If you were cool and you were chic, you had one of these little bricks in your pocket, the iPhone 4, and if you were really cool, you had an iPhone 4S, which had Siri, just brand newly introduced. There was 835 million mobile subscribers, smartphone subscribers. Today, there's about 3 times that. As you can see, the trajectory by 2020 will be up to 6.1 billion. Does anybody use the word portals anymore? In 2011, just 4 years ago, that's the first time that social networks took over for portals in terms of traffic. Pretty interesting. And while social networking is now ubiquitous, and we've got these logos on the screen that are the primary means of communication for most of us today, in 2011, they were just in their infancy. This little organization called WhatsApp had just got its initial seed round of $7 million. They were off to a brand new start. As you know, a year and a half ago, they were acquired by Facebook for $22 billion. Billion dollars with 50 employees. They now get about almost 1 billion users a day, which is pretty phenomenal. Snapchat, we talked about earlier today, it was just an idea. Now they're up to 200 million uniques a month. Pinterest, 100 million uniques a month. This tiny little no-name company called Instagram had 7 employees. We've covered a significant amount of ground in the last 4 years. And so it's logical to think that we'll experience the same amount of innovation over the next 4 years. The only problem with that explanation is that things are moving exponentially faster. Moore's law actually is speeding things up. And Moore's law, which originally applied to chips, now, as we connect things, is beginning to take place across many domains. Any domain that is affected by computing, which more and more domains begin to fall off the list, are now experiencing exponential change. So the translation of that means we will probably experience the same amount of innovation over the next 2.5 years that we have over the previous 4. We'll experience the same amount of innovation over the next 20 years that we have over previous 100. Things are moving fast, folks. So I have a couple of questions that are maybe relevant to you. What is an e-commerce company? I actually liked the comments from the gentleman from Bonobos today, because he talked about, they're widely recognized as an e-commerce company, but he talked about how physical stores are actually helping drive their experience. And we're seeing this collision and this merging of several different organizations. And from my perspective, an e-commerce company is really just one step on that path towards shortening the distance between desire and manifestation. We know that digital is where retail growth is going to be coming from. It makes up almost all of retail growth, and so we know that much. Anybody heard of Operator? One of the comments, or one of the themes of discussion that happened during the Bonobos conversation was this topic of we've got online and we've got offline, but we haven't really figured out how to merge the best of both worlds. And while most people are talking about Uber, and I'm not going to use Uber, but one of Uber's co-founders started this thing called Operator, and they said, hey, what if we could take the best of both worlds, human interaction and messaging with a brand, curate a bunch of interesting things really, really fast, and if we deliver value, we can offer a point of commerce right then and there. Seamless, frictionless, fast. So Operator right now is in beta. It's got a long waiting list, but this is what's happening with Operator. Anybody heard of Facebook M? Facebook M, similar concept where Facebook now wants to own your entire experience. And what's interesting is this is touted as a competitor to Siri or some of the other artificial intelligence agents, but Facebook actually has real humans on the back end. And these real humans are actually helping to train the artificial intelligence to gobble up more and more of the interaction. For commerce companies, what this means is that Facebook may become one of your largest distributors, as crazy as that sounds. If this works, human interaction driven by interaction with artificial intelligence and Facebook's experts, bringing in your products to fit with what these customers are looking for. Are you prepared for that? Sapient Nitro created this demo. They showed it at Cannes Lions earlier this year. And it's basically just virtual reality, a shopping experiment where I can get information on products, I can look at products, I can actually transact with products. But when I think about this, and I think about today the domain between physical retail and e-commerce, I ask myself, what is this? Is it closer to physical retail, where I'm actually going to a virtual store, but I'm interacting with it like I would physical? Or is it e-commerce because it's fully digital interaction? Well, really, it's probably a brand new domain that we haven't yet explored yet. And the media folks and the commerce folks in the room will need to get together to reinvent what this looks like. From a media perspective, we've seen this progression from text to imagery to sound and video. And when we look ahead to virtual reality, these fully immersive experiences, that's the world that we're looking for. That's the world that we're heading towards. And we've seen things like the New York Times accidentally go public with their internal struggles last year. All of you saw probably the New York Times Innovation Report, and we're watching them kind of wrestle through what it means to change. And maybe some of your organizations are going through a similar change. One of the things that I saw, though, earlier this year is how they ran this experiment. Anybody have you seen this? This was the cover of the New York Times magazine, and the famous French kind of revolutionary artist was commissioned to put this 150-foot art piece down in the middle of downtown Manhattan. And it was kind of a spectacle. They had a helicopter, they took pictures, but they also created a virtual reality experience as part of this, so that those that weren't there at the time, and this was immediately stripped down because I'm not sure that it was sanctioned by the city, but they could not only travel to a different place, but they could also travel to a different place in time, a different media experience. The same guy that did that, Chris Melk, also had previously created this experience, Clouds with Mitra. And the purpose of this experiment was a fully virtual reality environment that he shared the plight of Syrian refugees. And to an issue for the UN and the World Economic Forum, it was really, really hard to get the attention of folks. But to immerse them in virtual reality and to share it with world leaders, all of a sudden that got their attention, and it drove a whole different type of empathy. And so that's one use case. From a marketer, you can think of other use cases to give your consumers a whole different type of experience. From a movie producer, a content producer's perspective, what will this look like? How will typical film compete with a fully immersive experience in the future? What we do know, and what we all need to recognize and remember constantly, is attention is the scarcest resource that we're all wrestling for. A recent study that I saw said the price of attention has gone up 7 to 9 times in the past couple of decades. Those of you in the room that are advertisers would probably nod your head to that. But we need to remember, people want the same things that they always have. It's just taking place in a narrowing window of time. And we've got, as we heard this morning, 8 seconds to capture their attention and offer a compelling value proposition. So really, whether we're in media, whether we're in commerce, whether we're in something else, whether the technology is today's technology, yesterday's technology, or tomorrow's technology, our job really is to understand deeply and leverage this emerging technology to understand who our customers are, to offer them something of such relevant and extreme value that they're motivated to share, they're motivated to transact, they're motivated to tell their friends about it, and to engender trust by what we provide with them. And if we're able to do that, we'll be way better off. Now, I can't offer you guys, as my current customers, this type of experience, but what I can offer you is cocktails out on the deck in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to wrap up here. And on the topic of 4, I'm going to share with you a couple of things, just 4 takeaways for you to remember. 4 observations. Practical. We covered a lot of ground. Digitization is penetrating every corner of our world. Customers are more empowered, and their attention is fragmented, and loyalty is declining. Transition to networks is enabling big bang disruption in every industry. And AI, virtual reality, robotics, 3D printing, and the Internet of Everything are reshaping the world and the models. So questions you should be asking here at the end of the day as your eyes glaze over. How can we capture attention through providing something truly valuable? How do we leverage emerging capabilities to offer unparalleled value in exchange for a deeper understanding of our customers? How can we leverage emerging tech to help compress the distance between desire and manifestation? And how do we enable great experiences? It's all about great experiences. Digital, physical, content, product, media, in home, in store, inline, anywhere, and everywhere. Finally, 4 action items. Shorten the path between desire and manifestation. Increase trust. David spoke to it before this, how important trust is. No other time in history is trust more important. There's simplicity, transparency, and great experiences. Explore new emerging technologies to fuel experience innovation. And those of you in this room, you're the tip of the spear. You guys are truly the tip of the spear in terms of doing the things that you're doing. Lead your organizations well, lead them to growth, lead them to profitability. I wish you the best on your journey. Thank you so much for having me.